Yes, there are local elections, which I know have disappeared beneath the radar, and actually they're rather important local elections. The 4-yearly cycle of local elections that we have in Britain, there is one year that's bigger than all other years, and sometimes it's bigger than all the other years put together in terms of numbers of seats and number of councils have elections. And it's this year, and it's the first time that the general election has coincided with this round of local elections since 1979. And in 1979, politics was very different, not simply that there were really only then sort of 2.5 parties contesting the English local elections, but then also something like 20% of all seats were returned unopposed. In other words, there was one candidate and there wasn't really an election. This time, the vast majority of seats will be contested, and this also increases the job that the local elections officers have to do in terms of sorting out these elections, because also there is yet another tier. Helen said some of you are from overseas media outlets. There's another tier called parishes, which people don't pay much attention to, but is the closest to the local voter. And in the rural part of the country, there will be parish elections as well, and some councils also have mayoral elections, and some councils also have local polls or referendums on particular issues. So it's perfectly possible that a poor elector will trot up to the polling booth expecting to vote crucially in the general election and find themselves thrust with 2 or perhaps even 3 additional ballot papers to vote, and then come 10 o'clock, these all have to be separated and sorted and verified before the counting can be done, which is why there will be long watches of the night when there will be very few results and people will have to find things to talk about on television. Is that your phone covering itself?
Oh, I wish.
You will.
I wish.
Right, however, so let me say something about English local elections. Those of you who follow these things will know that over the last, goodness knows how long, we have compiled after each local election a calculation of what the results of those elections would have meant if they'd taken place across the entire country rather than the particular part of the country in which they actually have taken place. This is the pattern over the period from 2001 to 2014, and you will see in particular that after 2010, the performance of the Liberal Democrats has slumped quite dramatically. Up until that point, they were clearly almost on equal terms with the Reds and the Blues, and of course, the explanation for that in 2013 and 2014 was precisely the UKIP in 2014 getting something like 18% of the vote on a national equivalent basis, and in 2013 actually doing even better with 22%. And so this time last year we came along and did a similar talk when people were thinking also about the European elections then, but the locals would seem perhaps a better guide to the underlying pattern of politics in the rather weird European Parliament elections. And we forecast, anyway, it's all come up now. Our forecast last year was that the Conservatives would get 30. They did, in fact, get 30% of the vote. The Labour would get 33. They did a little worse. They got 31. Lib Dems would get 14. We're always kind of optimistic about poor old Lib Dems for some reason because they think local elections is their bag. But they actually ended up 11%. UKIP we forecast 60, and they got 18, which wasn't actually too bad. And as you'd expect, the pattern of local elections in the run-up to the local elections proved to be a pretty good indicator of how people would actually vote when it came to the main May contests. Michael will say something in a moment about whether this can also be translated to a parliamentary level. So, for informational purposes, really, what's going on this year? Sorry, first of all, the impact of the impact of the coming of this of the four-party politics, which is what you see there, and indeed in the Greens and others, has been that the share of the vote needed to win in various contests has been reducing. So this is the share of the vote scored by the worst performing 25% of successful candidates. Those, in other words, who just got over the line. And what you'll notice is that in the black bar is general election, the green and red are different kinds of local elections, which I don't need to explain at the moment. But you'll notice that what has happened over the period is that typically the sort of winning point for even the poorest performing candidates was somewhere in the mid to high 40s, and in the last couple of elections, thanks particularly to the impact of UKIP, it's now down to the late 30s and to the early 40s. And this, of course, has an implication for the number of marginal seats that there will be, and also has an implication for the majorities the winning candidates get. And of course, it also lowers the threshold which you have to reach in order to have a chance of winning an election in a particular constituency. So we're likely to see, I don't want to tread on the sort of the territory of other people, but we'd like to see several constituencies, one party getting, say, 33% of the vote, another party getting 30% of the vote, another party getting 29% of the vote, which John Curtis does as sort of lottery election, and then we sort of put the random shot results where you really can't be interested with. Okay, so what's happened in 2015 in the local elections? So there are 279 councils up for election, with over 9,000 seats contesting, and there are more than 30,000 candidates. The Conservatives are contesting about 90% of the seats, Labour about 75% of the seats, Lib Dems and UKIP both less than 50% of the seats, which is quite a significant reduction for the Lib Dems from last time, and it's a doubling for UKIP. They only contested 20% of the seats at these particular contests 4 years ago, and the Greens also are contesting about 40% of the seats. But one of the reasons for that happening, especially between Labour and Conservative, is, as you see, these are councils which not dominated by, but where certainly the Conservatives are in a plurality, and in particular they do dominate the shire districts, which are the rural, for the most part, and suburban councils in England. In other words, the Conservative heartlands, all those places where there are Conservative massive parliamentary majorities which are under no danger at all at this election. Indeed, in many places where the Liberals are in second place, those majorities of some of those MPs will rise, even if their party loses nationally. And so the seats reflect that. Again, Conservatives massively in the lead, twice as many seats they're defending as Labour, who are themselves defending twice as many as the Liberal Democrats. There have been significant boundary changes in about 60 authorities, and I normally try to do sort of notional results for these councils before the election in order that we've got a sort of like comparison, but it's just proved impossible to do that this year because there's so many of them and with other things around. So these seats do not absolutely reflect the seats that will be contested in the local elections on May 7th, but they are a clear indication that this is Conservative territory. It's not particularly good fruitful territory for Labour outside the urban areas, and it's somewhere where the Liberal Democrats have still a significant number of seats to defend. Smaller parties, this I think is fascinating. Who are these smaller parties? The parties that the others who won seats at the last time? Well, overwhelmingly, of course, they were independents. And look at 4 columns down, UKIP. They are defending 8 council seats in 2011. That's all. So their surge has really come in the last couple of years. And this could be the 3rd year in which they imposed themselves on local government. Okay, so in our usual way, we've done a national equivalent vote forecast for what we think may happen this year in terms of the local election shares of the vote. And according to our analysis of local elections up until they sort of started to a halt about a month ago, the Conservatives looked as if they might poll about 31% as a national equivalent. It will have no impact on their still stonking lead in terms of councillors return. That would be affected. Labour probably out in front of 32. The figures in brackets are the end of last week's YouGov polls averages. Liberal Democrats 13, always better than the polls. Never, as I said, quite perhaps performing as well as we think they might, because they're pretty canny about the seats they contest in local by-elections. They only contest where they think they're going to do quite well, which means that they do get a bit of a bonus however we try to control for it. But even now at local level, and I talked about this quite a lot last year, UKIP now clearly 3rd, they don't get a seat return as do the Lib Dems, which I'm sure something Matt will be talking about later, but they're likely to become 3rd in terms of share of vote in the local elections, again, which will be the 3rd year. Okay, so the change on 2011. In 2011, then cast your mind back, and this is the comparison year. We're not comparing this with the general election year. This is 4 years ago, these local elections last took place, so it's 2011, which was the time of the AV referendum, which stiffened turnout and stiffened the resolve of Conservative voters to a degree that took people by surprise at the time. And for a government in office, 1 year in, having done nothing but spectacularly to engender greater publicity, the Conservatives actually won those local elections. They won more seats, they actually gained some more councils in 2011 as a result of that really quite strong performance. But the other thing to note there, this is the kind of the last hurrah of the two-party system. Conservative Labour government in 2011 got 75% of the vote. Libs got 16, which was their lowest for 30 years, but would be a score that they would jump up and down with glee if they managed to get back to this time. And there were UKIP 3%, and the others 6%. I mean, that was it looked as if two-party politics. It looked as if the effect of the coalition had been to restore two-party politics, and we know since then that absolutely has not been the case. There's our by-election model forecast for this year, and what it shows is that all three main parties are going to lose share of the vote compared with 2011. Conservatives by the most, Labour down by as much as 5, Lib Dems down, but only it seems by 3. Bit of a health warning on that. And UKIP up, we've got them currently likely to get something like 15% of the vote, which is up 12. And of course, 15% of the vote, if it's everywhere, doesn't get you many seats. But. So, this is always the thing that Mike Smithson always tweets, and we go, oh my good God, this is now in the record. will be held.
It comes back and bites.
Yes, indeed. This has been very, very difficult this year. It's not a back of the envelope exercise, but because of the boundary change, it's been very difficult. And because UKIP did so badly 4 years ago, you had to make extrapolations from how they've done in particular areas in 2013, 2014, which have been good years for them. But we think that the Conservatives will be down something like 400 or 500 seats, about 10% of those that they're defending. Labour will be down a smidgen. Remember, they're also down, but not by as much as the Conservatives on our forecast of how the local votes are going to go. The Lib Dems also, because Labour and the Conservatives look as if they're going to fall more than the Lib Dems losses may not be too awful this time. But I think that assumes that they get some general election traction as well. And we reckon that UKIP may make about 400 seat gains. But I think this time for UKIP, seat gains may not be perhaps the story. These are the UKIP local hotspots. These are the places where UKIP has done well in local elections, and they may or may not correspond to the target areas that Matt will be talking about later. Some places have elections in 2013 and 2014, some only in one of those years. The first column is the share of the vote that UKIP got across the local authority area, and the second column in each case is the number of seats that they won in those particular areas. And that, in as much, is an indication of their sort of strength. In Rotherham, for example, they topped the poll and won almost half the seats 1 year ago. They could do the same again, or nearly do the same again this year, but that wouldn't have any impact on the council. North East Lincolnshire, again, somewhere they did very well. Thurrock as well, winning a reasonably high proportion of seats, but even a repeat of that wouldn't give them particular traction in the council. But somewhere like Basildon, where they won 10 out of 14 last time, somewhere like Great Yarmouth, where they won 10 out of 13, a repeat of that performance could lead to the UKIP majority council in those areas. And similarly, if they are able to repeat their performance where we have 2013 comparisons, Thanet, where of course Nigel Farage is standing, and Boston in Lincolnshire, where they won 5 out of 7 at the county elections. So they strangely aren't fielding a full slate of candidates in Boston. They are in Thanet, and they are in Thurrock, and in Basildon, and in Great Yarmouth, and in Castle, not in Castle Point because of the independents. But strangely, they've just about got enough candidates in Boston. If every one of them won, they could take control of that council. So it's perfectly possible that that's what's going to happen, that you may find somewhere in the Friday afternoon, you may find space just to notice that UKIP won control of a council. which I think in itself is a pretty good story. And from that seat projection and that analysis of the likely performance of UKIP, we've just picked out a few cancers and some more in the paper, which might change hands. Boston perhaps being won by UKIP, Great Yarmouth, perhaps a better chance of being won by UKIP, even if they don't win the parliamentary seat. Calderdale, a Labour gain, Erewash, a Labour gain, straight for the Conservatives, North Lincolnshire, a Labour gain, straight for the Conservatives. These are the kind of things you'd be looking for in terms of Labour doing well in the sort of more middle and northern areas where they're in a straight fight against the Conservatives. And Trafford, which is one of only two metropolitan boroughs still held by the Conservatives, Trafford and Solihull. Trafford could well go in Oval this time as well. And now I have a Colin.